Hello and welcome to another episode of Custody Central. Today we're going to do a comparison of axes versus spears. If you've already done the comparison and you've thought, I don't need to look at this again, and you've gone for spears, it's spears all day, every day, you can actually just skip the video. I don't think this is going to show you anything new. If you're interested, you can stick around for the math, but this is mainly for the people because in a lot of Discords, I'm still seeing questions like, can I take axes? How bad are axes, really? How close is it? And the answer is, I think it's a real slam dunk. You just always take spears and you forget about axes. So if you're one of those people that's still on the fence, or you're a bit hesitant about changing up your models, or you've already glued them, if you're a competitive player, I think it might be time to bite the bullet. Stick your models in the freezer and do some model surgery. So let's have a look at some profiles. Let's look at the spear profile first. You get 5 attacks, weapon skill 2, strength 7, AP 2, damage 2, right? Now, very often you're going to be doing the exploding sixes, so let's just keep that as the baseline for all our comparisons. When you do the exploding sixes, it's like you're getting five hits with the 5 attacks. With the axes, you're getting 4 attacks at weapon skill 3. Now, this is immediately a massive drop-off in volume. So just at the hit stage, you're going to be doing, with the exploding sixes, you're going to be doing 3.33 hits versus 5 hits with the spears. Now, keep in mind that means the spears are doing 50% more hits than you, and the axes are doing 50% more damage, right? Because 3 versus 2. So the thing to keep in mind is that the volume immediately cancels out the damage differential. So the delta really has to come between the strength and the AP. So these are the two things that you have to juggle. And I think the toughness profile of where it lands, where it matters, just doesn't occur as often as the AP differential. So we'll talk you through this in the examples, right? So the strength difference is only relevant at T4, T7, T8, T9, T14 and above. T14 and above, you don't really see, right? But you do see a lot of T4. And in my opinion, I don't think you very often see T7, T8, T9. You tend to see T3, T4, T5, T6, as mostly Custodes, and then a bunch of T10, T11, T12, that kind of stuff. But you don't see a lot of T7, T8, T9, which is relevant because the wound roll will be different, for strength 7 and strength 9. Now, I don't think we struggle to kill T4 things, so I don't think that's super relevant either. Especially if we factor in rerolls. I haven't done rerolls in this because if you're rerolling, your efficiency goes up by the same proportion for both profiles, unless it happens to be at one of these breakpoints where it can matter. But also keep in mind, if you're wounding on a 3+ rerolling, it's 89% conversion. It's not a big deal, right? 89% versus 97% on a 2+ rerolling. It's like, yes, there is a difference, but probably it's whatever is T4 that you're trying to kill is probably dead, like a lot. Versus tough stuff, I think we're very often popping +1 to wound, for monsters vehicles. I think if the axes had been strength 10, it would have been more interesting as to whether you take axes or spears or whether you take some blend, because this would have been relevant versus T5 and T10, and there's quite a lot of T5 and quite a lot of T10 vehicles, like the mini knights, for example, or some tanks vehicles, etc. So damage 3 is nice, obviously, but it's very, very often overkill, and you would prefer more volume of attacks because sometimes models only have 1 wound or only 2 wounds, right? So it's not as flexible, basically. Where are axes better than spears, right? And it's mainly, I think, going to come up where there's damage reduction on a target. Because if you have -1 damage on a spear profile, you're taking 50% of the output away. But if you're doing -1 damage on an axe, you're only taking 33% of the output away. So this could be a kind of broad headline example of where axes might be better. But you always have to keep in mind, what's the net save going to be? What's the wound roll going to be? Also, potentially against targets with wound profiles and multiples of 3 instead of 2. So you can cleanly kill a model per failed armor save, right? Versus having to waste the damage with a spear. Potentially, I think, versus 2 wound models with 5+ feel no pain. I feel like that ruins the efficiency of 2 damage versus 2 wound models with 5+ feel no pain. I suspect, I haven't gone through it, but I strongly suspect that it's probably better with three damage going through. And I think against targets with an invul save that's one away from their armor save, or where their armor save is worse than their invul save, this obviously gets rid of the AP differential, which is often very important when comparing axes versus spears. But the main takeaway here is that because it's damage 3 versus damage 2, that's not a good reason to think axes are better, right? And it's because the spears immediately get 50% extra hits, which counteracts the 50% extra damage from the axes, right? So you have to get the additional benefit from the wound roll, right? And this is really only going to come up versus T4, T7, T8, T9. And it has to not be offset by the reduced AP of the axe versus the spear. And once you gain, understand that, you realize it's actually an incredibly narrow set of circumstances where axes are better than spears. So where are spears clearly better? I think anything that's got a 2+ save, or anything that can get AP reduction. And I think also specifically anything with 4 wounds, because there you're wasting a lot of damage with your 3 damage axe attacks, whereas with the spears, you're killing it cleanly with 2 failed armor saves. Or where models, where they're just trash, right? Where volume is king. Against literally everything else other than the specific case versus T4, T7, T8, T9, right? Where the AP doesn't matter, and the wound count doesn't make it so that 3 damage is wasted, right? Spears are better all the time. So again, it's just a very, very narrow case. So let's run through some quick examples here, right? So Astra Militarum Guardsmen, doesn't have to be Guardsmen, but you'll see a lot of trash with this kind of profile, right? Like T3, crappy save, 1 wound. And you just have to kill loads of them, right? Could be Hormagaunts or whatever. So here in all our examples, we're going to do 6 Wardens, and we're going to assume they have all axes or all spears. You could have done Alaris, they would have all re-rolled their wounds, unless there is a difference in the wound roll, like it just doesn't matter, it's just increased efficiency, so we don't really do that, and we just always assume we do the exploding 6s, because typically that's the kata that you would use. So 6 Wardens have 4 attacks each. They're hitting on 3s, but they're getting exploding 6s, so it's like 5 out of 6 hits per attack. We're going to be winning them on 2s. We get 16.67 wounds through. They now get a 6+ save, which is hilarious for Guardsmen. So now we're killing just under 14 models. With the spears, we'd get 30 attacks. Get 30 hits because of the exploding 6s, cancel out the 1s. We'd still win them on 2s for 25 wounds, and we push them to an unsavable, right? 5+ -2, 7+, they can't save it. So we're killing 25 models. And you can see the difference here between 14 and 25 is a lot. Now, you might think you can kill chaff with shooting, right? Like, you can, but you will have to do a lot of heavy lifting in melee with Custodes. And if you have a lot of axes, or you have, or you don't have these spears, you don't have that volume to kill all the trash. And sometimes you need to kill the trash so you don't get move blocked. Sometimes you need to kill the trash to out-OC your opponent if they just flood you on primaries. So this is a very big difference that is very significant, and it comes up very, very frequently, right? So when we go through these examples, we have to weight how often they come up and how important is it, blah, blah, blah. We can do the reroll wounds, but it doesn't really matter because they're both wounding on 2s. So the proportion by which the efficiency increases goes up by the same. But as you can see, it's just spears are just incredibly, incredibly better. Let's have a look at Space Marines. Now, T4 is one of these breakpoints which is good for axes because they wound them on 2s instead of 3s, like the spears. So let's again go with the same example. 6 Wardens with an axe, you get 20 hits. You're winning them on 2s, so you get 16.66 wounds through. They're now saving on 4s, so you get 8.88 unsaved. So that's like 8.88 models dead, right? We get 26.6 damage. You can have that in the back of your mind in case you want to think about a profile that's not necessarily 2 wounds, so you're not wasting all the damage. But typically, T4, 2 wounds, you're going to see that quite a lot. With the spears, you get 30 attacks, 30 hits, 20 wounds, because you're winning them only 2/3 of the time, but you're now getting 2/3 of that damage through because you push them to a 5-up save. So now you're killing 13.3 models. In terms of actual damage, it's the same as the axes, right? Because 13.33 times 2 is 26.66. It's the same as 8.88 times 3, basically. When you reroll wounds, however, the percentage increase you get from going from 3+ to 3+ rerolling is much bigger than going from 2+ to 2+ rerolling. as a percentage against base, it's a bigger increase. So as a result, rerolling wounds doesn't make axes better either. It makes them worse, right, compared to spears. If we do Armor of Contempt, so now the axes say, the Space Marines save on 3+ still, you're now only killing 5.5 models. With Armor of Contempt, with the spears, we push them onto a 4+, so we'd be killing 10 models and we get 20 damage. And even on the damage, it's still better with the spears because we're comparing 20 versus 16.66. So the AP difference is setting off more than the raw damage increase, or the damage increase from wounding on 2s versus 3s. And Armor of Contempt pushes this back even more, and rerolling to wound puts the spears way, way ahead of the axes here. So this doesn't even help you to make the argument, right? Now let's have a look at a Bloodthirster. Now this is a good example of why it doesn't matter, where if the AP doesn't matter because this has got a 6+, 4++, and the toughness doesn't matter because it's not one of our breakpoints of 4, 7, 8, 9, or 14+, right? So it doesn't matter. So you can see here, we get 3.3 unsaved versus 5 unsaved on the spears, right? But remember, the axes do 50% more damage than the spears do. So the net result is that it's the same damage, right? We're just trading volume for damage here. The AP doesn't matter, the toughness doesn't matter. And if we did +1 to wound, nothing else changes because everything goes up with the same proportion. They just get 50% extra in damage because we now wound them on 4+ instead of 5+. Let's have a look at Tau Battlesuits. Same thing. T5, we win them on 3s, it doesn't matter. 3+, 4+, the AP doesn't matter. We still push them to a net 4-up save, right? We do 50% extra hits with the spears, and the axes do 50% extra damage. Now, in terms of the models killed, it still works out nicely because Tau Battlesuits, they tend to have the 5 wound profile because they take I think it's the shield drones to give them the additional wounds. In terms of the raw damage, it's also the same. So yellow here denotes that it doesn't matter, right? It's going to take 3 failed saves with the spears. It's going to take 2 with the axes. There's no difference there. Now let's have a look at Bloodcrushers because this is one of the breakpoints for toughness. This is T7. It's got a 4+, 4++, but they're 4 wounds. So here we'll, the AP doesn't matter, but we're wounding them better with the axes. So here we'd actually do 20 damage with the axes, but would still only kill 3.5 models. And the reason is these models are full wounds. So it's actually inefficient to kill them with 3 damage attacks, right? You almost kill one, and then you waste the other one, you waste two of that damage, right? Whereas with the spears, you just have to get 2 through. So we're doing less raw damage with the spears, but we're actually more efficient at killing Bloodcrushers because they're a 4 wound model. So again, you have to not fall foul of the model count, of the wound count of the model that you're attacking, right? And whether we do +1 to wound or not, it doesn't matter. The spears work out better to kill Bloodcrushers. Now, again, for damage, it's better because they have a better wound roll and the AP doesn't matter. But this wound count of your target comes up more often than you would think. And this, again, for all these cases where you think axes might actually be better than spears, they're typically not. Let's have a look at a Gladiator Lancer. This is T10. So again, it's not one of the breakpoints that we care about, but it's got a 3+ save. Now, when we attack this with axes, we get 20 hits. We convert a third of them for 6.6. They get to save on 4s, so we get 3.33 through, times 3 damage, we get 10 damage through. With spears, we get 30 hits, we get a third of them through with winning on 5s. But now we push them to a 5-up to save. So we get 2/3 of that through for 6.66, and times 2 damage is 13.33. This is more than 10. So even into, like a Lancer, spears are better. Now, if they do Armor of Contempt, the differential becomes even bigger because now the Lancer is saving on 3s versus axes versus 4s on the spears. So here the difference with Armor of Contempt would be 6.66 versus 10. Axes can't go better if they get +1 to wound because both outputs go up by 50%. So the gap widens, but the ratios stay the same, basically. So now let's look at something that has damage reduction. Right, Redemptor Dreadnought. This has damage reduction. It's T10 though, so the toughness doesn't matter. It's got a 2+ save, and it's got -1 damage. Now, if we go with the axes, we get 20 hits. We're still wounding on 5s, so 6.66 wounds. But you know, because it's got a 2+, now they're saving on 3s. So we need to get a third of that damage through for 2.2 unsaved. We get the -1 damage, so 2 times 2.2 is 4.4 damage. It's not a lot. All right, typically you'd be doing +1 to wound on this, so you get I think 6.66 through on average, right? With the spears, you get 30 hits. You'd wound a third of them for 10. We push them to a 4-up. They're getting 5 unsaved. -1 damage. We still get 5 damage. Again, low number, but it's still higher than 4.4. And again, if we did +1 to wound, we'd be getting 7.5 through. Still bigger than 6.66. So even versus a -1 damage target, which is kind of the category of thing that you think axes would be better against, because of the save, it's still better to take spears, right? If we do Armor of Contempt on top, the difference just becomes even bigger, right? The spears just become 50% better than the axes. Again, the +1 to win doesn't change anything ratio-wise. You just get 50% extra damage. You think, okay, but I'll take axes with Trajan. Trajan still doesn't make this better, right? Because with Trajan, what would happen is that the spear output goes up by 50%, right? Because now the -1 damage doesn't matter. Well, it depends which ruling that you play on, right? You might decide he doesn't affect -1 damage. You might decide that he does. If you decide that he does affect -1 damage and he can ignore it, spear damage goes up by 100%, and axe damage goes up by 50%. Which again widens this increase even more between axes and spears, with spears going even more into the lead. Let's have an example of where axes actually win, right? So here we need kind of 2 things to matter. This is T4, so we get a preferential wound roll. These guys have a 3+, 4++, so the AP difference doesn't matter. Now, in this actual case, they have a special rule, so they're re-rolling 1s on their invul saves. But because it's constant between the 2, this also doesn't really affect the math, right? So here with the axes, we're doing 20 hits as usual. We're now winning on 2s for 16.66. 15 out of 36 is our conversion rate because they get to re-roll the 1s. So we do slightly under half conversions for their failed saves on the invuls. And we kill just under 7 models because these are 3-wound models. This makes it very efficient. We're doing 20.8 damage. With the spears, it's less efficient now because we're doing 30 hits, but we're only wounding on 3s instead of 2s, so we're only getting 20 wounds through. 8.33 is what we get if we do 15 out of 36 times 20, so they get an 8.33 unsaved. But the problem is, because they're 3-wound models, we have to get 2 unsaved to kill a model, right? So we have to divide by 2. So we kill 4 models, and then you do 0.33 times 2 divided by 3 for the for the fractional model that we kill. And this is doing 16.66 damage. So here, this is an example where we're at a toughness breakpoint, the AP doesn't matter, and the wound characteristic of the target is actually preferential for damage 3. So this is actually an example where axes are better, and they're clearly better. And this is still the case even with Armor of Contempt. Right? For the spears, it just wouldn't make any difference because we'd still get stuck on the 4+ invul. So let's have a look at Gravis Marines. Gravis Marines are T5. They tend to have a 3+ save and 3 wounds. So if we do the 6 Wardens, 24 attacks, 20 hits, we're winning them on 3, so 13.33 wounds. We push them to a 4-up save, so 6.66 through. With flat 3 versus wound 3, 6.66 models, right? It's good. Spears, 30 attacks, wounding them on 3, so 20 wounds. But now we get 2/3 of the damage through because they're saving on 5, so 13.33. And this is, again, 6.89 models, right? The damage is a bit higher. Why is the damage a bit higher? Damage is a bit higher. But the models is about the same because now we have to waste the damage, right? Because there are only 3 wounds, but we have to get 2 failed through. With Armor of Contempt, yeah, the spears push out more ahead. So even in this kind of case, right, the AP difference matters quite a lot, and it means spears still win. Terminator Assault Squad. Now we're looking at T5, 2+4++ with 4 wounds. And here, the spears push massively in front. You can look at these results here, right? And the reason is they're 4 wound models. You're massively overkilling with your 3 damage, right? You're wasting 2 damage per killed model, basically. You know, your toughness isn't doing anything for you in terms of the axe. And basically, the difference here in efficiency really is the AP. The AP and the fact that it's a 4-win model. So let's have a look at a Night Warden. This is a tough vehicle, but also the Night Warden has -1 damage reduction, right? So let's look at what if we don't look at a 2+ save with -1 damage reduction. That's tough. Let's look at a 3+ save with -1 damage reduction. Now here, for all the knights, I've excluded the Feel No Pain because as long as we exclude it for both spears and axes, it doesn't matter. We're looking at ratios, right, to see which one is better. So when we look at the Wardens, we do the 24 attacks again, 20 hits. We're wounding on 5+, so 6.66 wounds. We push them to a 4-up save, so we get 3.33 through, -1 damage, 2 damage each, 6.66 damage with an X, right? With the spears, we get 30 attacks, 30 hits. We wound them on 5, so 10 wounds, but we still get 2/3 of that through because we're at -2, so we push them to a 5-up. And 6.66, we get the -1 damage reduction, so we're just doing 1 damage per, right? And you can see it's the same, right? Even though it's -1 damage, this is offset by the AP, right? And the volume from the spears. If we add Trajan to the mix and we say that Trajan ignores -1 damage, which you may or may not agree with, and on this, you know, I'm still waiting for FAQ. I think, you know, by the way, if you're playing games with Trajan and you can't agree with your opponent, just let your opponent decide, or roll it on a 4+. It's not worth the argument. Our army is plenty strong. If you do Trajan ignores damage reduction, this goes well in favor of the spears, right? Because your axes get a 50% damage reduction, but your spears get 100% damage, not damage reduction. Your axe efficiency goes up by 50%, but your spear efficiency goes up by 100%, right? Because you go from 1 damage to 2 damage, axes go from 2 damage to 3 damage, right? So this would be 13 point something versus 10. So here, spears would be better. What about for a Knight Crusader? This doesn't have damage reduction. This is just T12, 3+ save. So again, T12 is not a breakpoint. And as a result, because of the AP difference, spears are doing more damage. Spears are doing more damage than axes, right? Even versus these big targets. And this is because it's offset by volume and spears, right? This is just a reduced differential than the Warden, right? Where you're doing -1 from each, right? Where the difference was 100% difference between an axe and a spear. Now it's less than 100%. Now it's 50% difference. So the Castellan, right? Castellan, this is T13, again, not a breakpoint, but it's got a 2+ save. Here again, the spears win, right? 10 versus 6.6. If we do +1 to wound, doesn't change any of the math, right? We just get 50% damage increase. So again, the spears win. So what's the best kind of case that we need for axes to be really, really good versus spears, right? You need like T8 or T4 with a 3+4+ invul, right? And if you can get, and T8 is the best one, right? And T8 is the best one because spears will wound on 5s and axes will wound on 3s, right? So this is now like 100% increase in difference in wound rate. So here, if that's the case, then yes, axes do twice the damage, 20 versus 10. If we did +1 to wound, this reduces the efficiency a bit because now we go from comparing wounding on 2s to wounding on 4s, right? Which is less of a difference than comparing wounding on 3s versus 5s. But also, I couldn't think of any unit that's T8 that has a 3+4+ save. if you can think of them and you're commonly coming across them, do let me know in the comments below. I think other people would want to know as well, because this would be the best case to say why you would consider wanting to run X's. So anyway, in conclusion, it's actually really hard to find a case where an X is better than the Spear. We found one with the Bladeguard Vets, or this hypothetical scenario of T8 with a 3+4++, right? But it's not that common, because basically the damage gain, D3 versus D2, is just offset by the volume with the exploding sixes, right? And if there's a difference in net save, then usually, the Spears just come out ahead. If you run Trajan and you treat him as ignoring damage reduction, like the Spears go even more ahead of the Axes. And particularly if you have the Axes, you're terrified of stuff that's got a 2+ save and Armor of Contempt or similar, right? It's just horrific. So going back to army construction, kind of, basic principles, we want to have as many flexible units that can do as many things as possible efficiently, and one of those is actually Horde Clear. We just don't have that many units. So we need all of our units to do all of the things, including Horde Clear. And taking Axes makes you significantly worse at Horde Clear versus Spears, right? And this is definitely not offset by the few niche cases you can make for Axes being better than Spears, right? So too long didn't read. Everybody takes a Spear, they can take a Spear at the moment. So thank you very much for making it to the end of the video. Hopefully this is all kind of stuff that you would have known already, but hopefully for some of you that were still on the fence and you thought, oh, I can make some case for why Axes are better. Hopefully this convinces you that yes, just rip the arms off and stick the Spear on, or count them as Spears. Or some people have been doing halberds where the model is a Spear and an Axe at the same time, but at the start of the game you just declare with your opponent. Like all my guys are Spears basically. The only guy who gets an Axe is Trajan. So thank you very much. Don't forget to check out my Patreon if you want to chuck money at me, or join the YouTube channel if you want to chuck money at me. And thank you very much, and we'll see you guys next time.